Welcome to Global Conversations about Boundaries. And I am here today with my very dear friend, and she's also a psychotherapist, Charlene Ray. Welcome, Charlene. And I've invited Charlene to have a conversation today about some of the things that we're all dealing with around the coronavirus. And Charlene is really, she's got many, many gifts, but she's also a grief specialist. And I thought we could have a meaningful, maybe helpful conversation for our listeners about the coronavirus, about all that everybody is dealing with, the changes and the challenges and some of the grief that is coming up. So first of all, how are you, Charlene? Because every conversation now really starts with, how are you?
Thank you, Sarri. And I appreciate that because, and I agree with you, that is how we really want to begin every conversation with each other, a real check-in, just to see how we're doing. And I'm doing pretty well. I'm a bit overwhelmed with technology, with all the time that we're all having to spend on technology, and really missing the human contact. And I know I'm not alone in that because many of my clients and just pretty much everyone I talk to says that they're missing those face-to-face conversations in the same room with someone, and where you could reach out and, touch a hand, give a hug. So I'm just really feeling the limitations of digital connection.
Yeah.
And, it's a gift that we can be connected in this way, because if we imagine our ancestors going through times like this without being able to connect.
Yeah, it's something that's better than what they had. But I too am feeling very saturated by the online. It's not how I usually work. I do a little bit of online work, but a little bit of online work is not the same as a lot of online work. And I miss that contact in the room with people a lot. Yeah. So I'm glad you're well, though, and everyone around you as well, because that, can be a changing thing day by day here. So what are you doing that's just kind of helping yourself with coping right now with the coronavirus?
Well, for me, that you asked that is great, because yesterday this came up in a meeting I was in, and I like the way the question was phrased. The person asked, "What is your medicine right now?" And it kind of is that same question of what are you doing right now to help yourself? And for me, my medicine is a medicine that I often turn to, which is nature. And so what I'm doing is getting outside every day. And, we've been blessed here in the Northwest with beautiful spring days, and the sun is shining, and I just try to get out and spend a little time, several times a day, just really soaking in the sunshine, but also just noticing what's happening in nature, looking for all the signs of hope that spring always brings us, but that seem even more important right now.
Yeah, for me, yesterday I saw these, the dandelion puffs are out, and I thought, oh my gosh, they were just so poetic with the seeds and the way they carry on the air. It just inspired this haiku. And yesterday someone invited me to see an elephant seal that comes up and has her baby every year on Whidbey Island. And so I got to see the mama and the baby, and it was extraordinary. I mean, there's those moments too of just what happens when we go outside. It can be as simple as a dandelion puff, or it could be, something extraordinary happening. I'm also finding that reading is helping too, like just going into some books and to being outside. I would go outside, rain or shine, quite honestly.
Mm-hmm. Yes, me too. Me too, definitely. And poetry is helpful to me as well. That's another place I often turn, no matter what the crisis is to the poets, because I always find that the poets can say what I have difficulty saying. They say it so well and so beautifully. And so I've been reading more poetry than usual too.
So I know that there are people listening who may have lost a dear friend or a family member, or a friend or a coworker. There's already so many people that have lost their lives to the coronavirus. I think of it as the one and the many losses. There's sort of the one significant people in your life that you may have lost, or there may be many losses, around all the changes, your job, your routine, your contact with other people, and it may be so much that you may not even realize that you're grieving. What are some of the signs of grief, Charlene?
Yeah, I think that, well, one of the things that I would like to say to what you just said too is that, of course, the loss of a loved one or someone we care about is, we would feel that that's often the worst loss we can have, and the thing that's happening is that kind of loss is happening within the framework of all of us experiencing loss. Life as we knew it does no longer exist.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have this collective grief that we're all feeling. And so it's the symptoms are, there might be slightly different if a loved one has died, and that might look that might be a little more familiar to people because they might have experienced that kind of grief before. But they are similar, and we are all experiencing some of these, and it can be, initially it can be a shock too, a feeling of like numbness or confusion or overwhelm, and that anxiety of not, this situation is filled with so much unknown, so many unknown things, so much uncertainty that, that feeling of anxiety can be pretty predominant for
there's
many
a
people.
loss of even being able to plan for the future. I mean,
That's
I know
right.
that all of us know that we don't know what is really in the future, but we've really lost a sense of being able to plan for the future, and a sense that we don't really know what happens next. And that too is a loss. So what are some of the signs of grief? Because I'm not sure that everybody listening, is as aware of like kind of some of what you may be experiencing may actually be the grief of that you're feeling from all of this.
Yes, so you can feel, that sense of confusion and overwhelm, but it can also look like changes in your sleep patterns. Maybe you're wanting to sleep more and having trouble getting out of bed. Maybe you're having difficulty falling asleep or waking up a lot at night. It can be crying and feeling like I don't even know why I'm crying. So a lot of tears and sadness for what you. A
lot of easily frustrated, right?
Yes, irritations and frustration, and that's pretty common. Also, you could see some appetite changes, and sometimes that can be, forgetting to eat, or it can be a real strong desire to eat, especially comfort foods and things that soothe you in some way. It could be a lack of focus, fogginess in the brain. A lot of those are the symptoms of, there are obviously symptoms of many things, but right now, if you're feeling those feelings, it's likely that you're feeling grief. So, those are some of the main ones. Physical symptoms too. I think also people can forget that they, if they have headaches and nausea or stomach
Migraines.
aches, migraines, that can also be a part of the grief.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what are some ways that you think helps during a time like this for acknowledging and understanding those feelings of grief and loss and overwhelm?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the first things is to be able to acknowledge that this is grief. You know, to be able to get to a place where you can maybe listen to this and say, "Wait a minute, I didn't even realize I was grieving." Because the first step from healing, you know, from grief is to acknowledge the presence of grief, and so to really be starting to think about what's happening as grief and the loss. You know, these losses are real. I think a lot of times we can just go numb to what's actually really happening, but then when we start to look at all the ways in which our life has changed in just a short time, we
Yeah, and
can.
I've also had some concern for, there are people that were already grieving before this happened, that were already experiencing some pretty large loss in their life. And then this happened. And so they've gotten kind of grief on top of grief, and are feeling so weighed down by all of this. And it's almost like it can feel like you're getting buried by the weight of what's the anxiety and the fear and everybody else's fear around you, because you were talking about that earlier, Charlene, that it's almost like, it's magnified because everyone is feeling this too.
Yeah. And I think that when we realize that that's what's happening and we can acknowledge that this is grief and we can allow ourselves to feel our feelings, I think it's really important to allow ourselves to experience the sadness, the anger, the anxiety, the frustration, to let ourselves feel those. And then to remember that grief is not meant to be experienced alone, that we are, we grieve, in community. And we could say is tricky about this grief is that because it's a collective grief, because we're all grieving the loss of our attachments to our life as it was, that, how can we help one another when we're all grieving? But that's exactly what we do. It's that I listen to your grief and you listen to my grief, and we just show up for each other. And that's one of the, so reaching out for help, for support. There are lots of, there is counselors, obviously, but there are also, a good friend who will listen and not try to fix your feelings
And to make that an exchange with your friend, I'm really been encouraging people from my my work on overwhelm and overwhelm recovery is all about having a person as a listening post. And, when you're talking about the collective grief, Charlene, it means that, you can have a shared listening post with someone. You can say, how about if you talk about it for the first 20, 25 minutes and then I'll talk. Couples can do this with each other at home. They can take turns and give each other some listening support, and give each other a chance to download. And you could do it with a friend and to really create maybe that space with each other around, how are you dealing with the grief? And to be specific, I would even say to ask about it and say, how are you doing with the grief that you're going through right now?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think what I call that in my grief counseling world is finding a grief buddy. And usually that's finding someone who's had a similar loss, who can understand what you're talking about when you're sharing your story. And in this case, we're all in this. We all could be grief buddies for one another, even though we have varying degrees of experience with grief. And I do feel like those people who are grieving already, it can be a little bit more complicated for them.
I do notice that, when we grieve, some of us have in our head, and I don't know what you call this, but some of us have this little voice in our head that says, I shouldn't talk about this to anybody, or I shouldn't share this with anybody because I'm going to burden them.
Mm-hmm.
And they're already carrying so much, so I'll just kind of carry my load on my own and not burden others because they're already carrying so much. What do you say about that voice? Because it's like a mind trick on you that keeps you isolated.
Yes, and I do say that voice is a normal voice to have. We all have it, and I think that there may be people where it would be a burden for them to hear your grief story, but there's always someone who's ready and willing to listen to your grief story, and who wants to hear it, and then it also gives them permission to share theirs.
So it could be checking it out with somebody,
yes, yeah,
like to say, are you in a place where we could be support to each other and hear each other's grief?
yes.
Or is that too much for you right now? And
yes,
rather than assume that you know that in your head,
that's right.
You can ask and find out who are the people or person that, is available and would be okay with having that kind of an exchange with you.
Yes, I think that's a good idea. And especially right now, I think no matter what we want to talk about with each other, that's especially things that might be harder to talk about during this time, we do want to check out, as part of that, how are you? That initial, how are you?
I noticed that I've had a hard time with with people when they want to when they go into talking about the news. I've realized that, outside of my space for my clients who are allowed to kind of hold the space, but when my friends go into it, I've had to kind of set a limit and say, I can talk about what's going on. I can hear how you are. But I'm having trouble going into the news further.
Mm-hmm. I can relate to that as well. Yes.
Has that been hard for you to talk about or hear a lot more about?
Well, it's definitely a boundary I've been setting, and for myself personally, I love not watching a lot of news. So if I'm saying that that's what I need right now, then if I do hear it from someone else, from a friend, I do want to, say similar to what you said, that, and I often share, that for me, then this is what happens when I listen to too much news, and it doesn't help. It doesn't help the feelings that I'm feeling. It can bring up more fear and more anxiety, and especially because I don't know if the news is accurate, and it brings all kinds of questions, and some of my clients tend to watch too much news or listen to too much news. So we end up talking about, how is that helping them, or how is that
how does that
them?
feel?
Yeah, how does it feel when they do that? And trying to help them tune more into what are you feeling in your body?
Because initially when this broke out, I think there was kind of a need for all of us to get almost as much news as we possibly could, because we weren't really getting information. Mm-hmm. And so we were really seeking information. And now I've noticed that that's sort of calmed down. We do kind of know where we are. And what I like is to have a news check-in point every day. And I go through my check-ins with the different news sources that I like to go to, but I also like to contain it. I don't like to start my day that way, because I like to get out of bed and have a more peaceful start to ground me in the day. So I do it, kind of after dinner. I have a little break. I like to watch it with my husband, so I have somebody to talk about it with afterwards. But 20 minutes is enough for all my check-ins and my big picture of what's happening.
Yeah, I think that's good. That sounds like a really great practice. And I love that you're not doing it close to bed either, because we really want to make sure that we create some, space that's relaxing and conducive to sleep. At least an hour, preferably a couple hours before bedtime. And I always say to people, if you watch 20 minutes of news, then you need 40 minutes of something good afterwards.
Oh, I love that.
To balance it off. So it's always double.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is kind of an experience with coronavirus where we're getting to really focus on how we take care of ourselves and each other. And that's really kind of risen to the top, and in a way that is so important for our well-being and our survival. You know, I remember during 2008 how ill people became when the economy crashed. And there was just widespread sickness because people's immune systems were affected. And I have concern about that with all the stress of the losses during coronavirus, the stress on people if they aren't doing these small bits of self-care and really watching themselves. They're going to be at much higher risk for other illnesses other than the coronavirus, which is deadly as it is or very life-threatening. But it can be other illnesses that they're also very vulnerable to, that is really a call for our self-care right now.
I agree. Yes, we want to be really thinking about how we're nurturing ourselves, in all realms, body, mind, spirit, energy, just really thinking about that and giving even more time than we think we need to nurturing ourselves.
And noticing each other too.
Yes.
You can pay attention to those around you and see, like sometimes my husband will be like overdoing things, and I'll need to like interrupt and go, honey, it looks like a break would be good for you right now. You've been kind of going and going since really early, and maybe it's time now for, a little walk outside or a bike ride, a break. So we can also kind of keep an eye on each other and do little self-care reminders.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And really, the only way through this particular type of pandemic and pandemic of grief is helping each other. I mean, the only way, through is if we look out for each other and in our smaller families, like you mentioned, but also our communities that we live in, and then, our state, our country, and around the world. I mean, this is truly it is a global pandemic, and it's the only way out is a global coming together.
Right.
And it reminded me about, I was talking to an author in the book series that I work with, and she was in Colombia, and she was sitting in her house, and she asked me, "Are you isolated in your house?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "If we think for a moment, right now, all over the whole world, so many of us are doing the same thing." And she said, "When have we ever done the same thing?" And she, and we were talking about how it's an opportunity. It's not something that we want to be doing, would ask for, and we certainly are. The loss of life is tragic, but because we are all sitting in isolation together, because we care about humanity and we want as many people as possible to come out of this alive, this is an opportunity for something good. The possibility of our coming together while we're sitting in isolation is so powerful. And I've seen people, having global prayers and global, raising energy on a global way, and, concerts in homes and money for food banks. And, people really, the best of people also comes out in these situations.
And I think it's an opportunity for everybody to ask themselves, how are they contributing to the betterment of everyone else? What else can we do that is helpful to our neighbors, to our families, to our friends, people whose lives you can genuinely make a difference with right now? It's really important to just think about those others around us and how we are connected, and being sure that we are kind of staying in that mindset of togetherness,
Mm-hmm.
that in the isolation, we're also very together,
Mm-hmm.
and that we're very connected, and that you can do lots of acts of kindness for neighbors and for family members and for your community right now. There are needs that are being kind of placed out there, or somebody came up to me and said, Sarah, you know a lot of people. If there's somebody that you know that's in great need, please let me know. And I thought, what a beautiful thing
Mm-hmm.
for her to say, because none of us can take care of everybody around us that we might need to be. And it's really lovely to know that somebody is offering their help and support if somebody else is in need. And I too have seen what you've seen, this great outpouring around us. So essential right now.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any final thoughts that you want to share on grief? Anything I haven't asked about? Or
Well, I think that, I think it's just important to remember that, we grieve because we love. And whenever our attachments are threatened or severed, it's normal to grieve. And I feel like once we realize that, I think more people are coming out of denial and into the realization of what's happening, and that this, in some more people are saying maybe this is grief. And then I think we'll be able to move to a place of finding the meaning that you're talking about, because the meaning comes in helping each other, and what you're talking about, where we're looking at our sense of purpose and why are we here and what is this a greater call to. And I think that's I just would like people to really give themselves enough space and not try to have this be a time to do too much, to put a lot of pressures on themselves, but give themselves a lot of space for feelings, and know that there will be plenty of time to find meaning in this and find a way to contribute, to helping each other as we go forward.
yeah, and the people I'm thinking about with help are people with really immediate food security needs, people who are in some serious health
Yes.
crises, but are alone and really need neighbors to step in. Yeah. So I want to end this with a little thank you to our healthcare workers and our first responders. Oh my God, thank you
Yes.
all for your sacrifices. Thank you all for your courage. Thank you all for taking care of us and for showing up in something that's been so hard. And thank you for your help during this time. And thank you, Charlene, for your beautiful work in the world. It's so needed. You're just doing such valuable, helpful work. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarri, for being you. It's always an honor to be with you.